It was just another regular day at home. I was slouched on the couch, flipping through the pages of a novel, trying to drown out the hum of everyday life. My sister Allison and her fiancé Harold were in the kitchen. They were prepping dinner together, laughing about something, probably some inside joke I wasn't in on. They had this chemistry, the kind that made people around them uncomfortable, like watching a couple too into each other at a party. I didn't want to be the third wheel, but I couldn't escape it. Harold had moved in with us while they were saving up for a house. It was a temporary situation, but it felt permanent. I glanced up when I heard Harold's laugh, deep, rich, the kind that pulled attention whether you wanted to give it or not. He looked up at me, caught me staring, and flashed that smile, the smile that made me feel something. "Everything okay?" Nadie asked, wiping his hands on a towel. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a grin, "just tired." His eyes lingered a second longer than they should have before he turned back to Allison. It was a small moment, but it hit me like a punch in the gut, this thing I was feeling. Wrong. So wrong. The thing is, I've never been good at dealing with emotions. I kept them tucked away like old clothes you pretend to forget. But lately, with Harold here every day, I was running out of places to hide them. I tried focusing on my book again, but the words blurred. The tension in the room was palpable, at least for me. I needed to get out of there, clear my head, get some air before I did something I couldn't take back. "I'm heading out for a bit," I muttered, not waiting for a response as I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the door. As I walked down the street, the cool air biting at my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. A storm was rolling in that evening. Dark clouds swirled overhead, and the wind picked up, slapping my jacket against my body as I walked back toward the house. I had spent enough time outside trying to clear my head, but it didn't help. Nothing did these days. When I got back, the house was quieter than usual. The storm had hit hard, trapping everyone else at work. Allison, Mom, Dad, they were all stuck at their jobs, probably waiting it out until the roads cleared up, but Harold was here. Of course he was. As I stepped inside, I caught sight of him sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. "You okay?" I asked, feeling like I had to fill the silence. He glanced up, offering that smile again, though this time it was softer. "Yeah, just waiting for the power to go out," he joked, though his eyes darted to the window. I shrugged out of my wet jacket, trying to act casual. "Storm's brutal." He nodded, then stood up and stretched, his shirt lifting just enough to show the toned skin beneath. "Want some tea?" He was already moving toward the kettle before I could answer, filling the awkward space with something simple, something safe. "Sure," I muttered, sitting down at the table. My heart was pounding and I hated it. I hated that I couldn't just act normal around him, but as much as I tried, there was this pull like gravity and I couldn't fight it. He placed a mug in front of me, and our hands brushed. Just a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through me like a spark. Harold's gaze caught mine, and for a second we both froze. Neither of us said anything. The air was thick between us, heavy with something unspoken, something I couldn't name but felt deep in my bones. "You've been acting weird lately," Harold finally said, breaking the silence, his tone lighter than the tension I was feeling. "Everything okay?" I should have brushed it off, made some joke, deflected, anything, but instead my mouth moved before I could think. "You ever feel off?" I asked, my voice lower than I meant it to be. He tilted his head, watching me carefully. "Off how?" I looked away, regretting even saying anything, but the words kept coming, like, "You know you shouldn't be thinking about something. Someone." I wasn't looking at him, but I felt his eyes on me, the weight of them pressing down like the storm outside. "What are you getting at?" Harold asked, his voice just as quiet now. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to say what I was really feeling. "Nothing. Forget it. I'm just tired." It was a lame excuse, but it was all I had. "Right," Harold said, though he didn't sound convinced. He let out a breath, leaning back in his chair, his eyes not leaving mine. "But if you ever want to talk about whatever's going on in that head of yours, you know I'm here, right?" I nodded, but my throat was tight, my mind screaming that I had already said too much. Harold went back to his phone, but that moment hung in the air, and I couldn't shake it. Something between us had shifted, and I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming next. The storm outside might have been raging, but it was nothing compared to what was happening inside me. The next morning I woke up early, the storm long gone, but the mess in my head was still there, worse than ever. I avoided Harold. I avoided the kitchen, the living room hell. I even skipped breakfast just so I wouldn't have to see him. Whatever happened last night, the way our hands touched, the way he looked at me, it was messing with my head. It was wrong. I had to get out, distract myself, so I headed to work. The bookstore was quiet, just the way I liked it. I spent the day shelving books, restocking, and avoiding customers as much as possible. But even there, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I'd close my eyes, I'd see his face, feel that spark. I had to stop. It was insane. And if Allison ever found out, I couldn't even finish that thought. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Harold. "You doing okay? Seemed off last night." I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't want to respond. I didn't want to open that door again, but something made me type back before I could think. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just busy at work." I tossed the phone aside, hoping that'd be the end of it, but a part of me knew better. That moment we shared wasn't just a fluke. I could feel it. And the fact that Harold texted me, checked in on me, it was like he felt it too, and that terrified me. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't be that guy. Allison was my sister. Harold was her fiancé. There were rules you didn't break, and this was the biggest one. But the more I tried to shut it down, the more it festered inside me like some twisted temptation I couldn't shake. Every smile Harold threw my way, every brush of his hand, it was all pulling me deeper into something I didn't want to admit to myself. By the time I got home that evening, I was exhausted physically and mentally. The house was quiet again, which was a relief. But just as I was about to head to my room, Harold's voice stopped me. "Nate, wait." I turned slowly, forcing a casual expression on my face like everything was totally fine. But when I saw him standing there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. My chest tightened. "About what?" He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "About whatever the hell was going on between us." I felt my heart skip a beat. No, we weren't going to talk about this. "There's nothing going on, Harold," I said, shaking my head. "You're with my sister. This is just, you're reading into things." He raised an eyebrow. That damn knowing look on his face. "Am I?" "'Cause last night didn't feel like nothing, Nate. And you know it." I swallowed, trying to hold it together. "It doesn't matter. You're engaged to Allison. This I gestured between us, feeling ridiculous. This can't happen. We need to stop." He didn't back down, just stared at me with that intensity that made my whole body feel like it was on fire. "Maybe we do," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But tell me you don't feel it too." I wanted to. God, I wanted to lie, tell him it was all in his head, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was stand there staring at him, feeling everything I didn't want to feel. "I thought so," Harold muttered, his lips curling into a half smile. He stepped back, giving me space. "For now, we'll pretend this didn't happen. But we both know it's not going away, Nate. You can lie to yourself all you want, but it's still there." I watched him walk away, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I had every reason to run, to shut this down before it got worse. But the problem was, the more I tried to fight it, the more I realized Harold was right. This wasn't going away. The next few days were torture. I threw myself into work at the bookstore, anything to avoid being home, avoid him. But Harold's words lingered in the back of my mind. No matter how hard I tried to shut them out, you can lie to yourself all you want. But it's still RB. Damn him. And I wasn't even sure what to do anymore. So I did the only thing I could. I called my best friend, Jess. We met up at a bar later that night. Jess was the only person who knew the real me, the only person I could trust with the mess that was my life. She took one look at me as I sat down across from her, and immediately raised an eyebrow. "What the hell's going on with you?" she asked, sipping her drink. "You look like someone ran over your dog." I laughed weakly, running a hand through my hair. "It's complicated." Jess leaned in, her eyes narrowing. Complicated how? Spill." I hesitated, not sure where to start, but I needed to say it, needed someone to tell me I wasn't completely insane for feeling this way. "It's Harold." Her eyes widened. "Harold? Your sister's fiancé, Harold." I nodded, staring down at my drink, feeling the weight of the words. "Yeah. Jess didn't say anything for a second, just blinked at me, her mouth slightly open. Then she let out a long breath. "Okay, so what exactly are we talking about here?" I shrugged, feeling like an idiot. "I don't know, Jess. He's been different with me lately. It's like I can't shake the feeling that something's going on between us. It's wrong. I know it's wrong. But wait," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Are you saying there's like a thing happening between you two? Because that's kind of a big deal, Nate." I sighed, rubbing my face. "There's nothing concrete, no relationship or anything, but we kissed." Jess's mouth fell open, and for once she was speechless. Then she leaned back, her arms crossed. "Okay, I'm gonna be straight with you here. This is bad, like really bad." I know, I groaned, burying my face in my hands. "Trust me, I know, but it's not just physical. It's like I feel something for him, Jess, and I don't know what to do." Jess was quiet for a moment, which was rare for her. "Look, I love you, Nate, but this isn't just any guy. This is your sister's fiancé. You're walking on thin ice here. And if this blows up..." Her words hit like a punch. Of course I knew the stakes, but hearing it from someone else made it all feel so much more real. I wanted her to tell me it was okay, that maybe Harold and I had some kind of star-crossed fate, but that wasn't reality. "So what do?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. She sighed, leaning forward again. "I can't tell you what to do. But you need to figure out what you want, and fast. You can't keep dancing around this thing with Harold. Either you shut it down for good, or you come clean to Allison. But you can't have it both ways." I nodded, feeling the weight of her advice sinking in. Jess was right. This couldn't go on like this. I had to make a decision, but I wasn't ready to face the consequences just yet. "Thanks, Jess," I muttered, even though her advice had only made me feel more lost. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "I'm always here, but Nate, just be careful, okay? This isn't a game." I nodded, though inside I wasn't sure I could keep it from spiraling. Harold was already in my head, and no matter how hard I tried to pull away, part of me wasn't ready to let go. As I left the bar and headed home, the gravity of what Jess had said weighed on me. I knew I had to figure things out, but when I saw Harold's car in the driveway, that pull, that twisted desire was back, and I wasn't sure I could resist. I barely stepped inside the house when I saw Harold sitting on the couch, his feet up on the coffee table, looking like he'd been waiting for me. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching it. He glanced over at me as I shut the door behind me, and there was that look again, the one that made my stomach twist in knots. "You're out late," he said, his voice casual, but there was something under the surface. "I was with Jess," I replied quickly, hoping that would end the conversation. Just needed to clear my head. "Right," Harold said, not taking his eyes off me. "We need to talk." I froze. Those 4 words held too much weight, and I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation I could walk away from about what I asked, even though I already knew. "You know what?" Harold stood up and crossed the room toward me. "You've been avoiding me, Nate. And we can't keep pretending nothing's happening." I swallowed, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. I could feel the tension between us, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. "I'm not avoiding you," I lied, but my voice betrayed me, cracking at the end. Harold didn't believe me, and I couldn't even blame him. "Bullshit," he stepped closer, and suddenly we were too close. "You think I don't notice? Every time I get near you, you freeze, and then you disappear. What are you so afraid of?" I took a step back, needing space, needing air, but Harold followed. "I'm not afraid," I said, but the words felt hollow. I was terrified. He raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you running?" "I'm not running." The words came out louder than I intended. And for a moment, we both just stood there, staring at each other. I took a breath, trying to calm down. "Look, Harold, this is wrong. You're engaged to my sister. We can't keep doing this." He didn't back down, his eyes boring into mine. "I know it's wrong, but tell me you don't feel it. Tell me you don't want this." His voice was low, dangerous, and my resolve was crumbling under the weight of it. "I can't," I whispered, my hands clenched at my sides. "But that doesn't make it right." Harold stepped even closer, until there was barely any space left between us. I could feel the heat radiating off him, and my heart was hammering in my chest. "Maybe not," he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. "But it doesn't make it go away, either." Before I could stop him or myself, his hand was on the back of my neck, pulling me toward him. I should have resisted, I should have pushed him away, but the moment his lips crashed against mine, all the tension, all the weeks of fighting this, exploded. I kissed him back, hard, like I'd been waiting for this moment all along. His hands were everywhere, my neck, my back, pulling me closer, and I couldn't think straight. All I could feel was him, his body pressed against mine, the way he tasted, the way his touch lit me on fire. For a second, nothing else mattered. Not Allison, not the guilt, not the consequences. It was just us, and the world outside could have been burning for all I cared. But then, reality slammed back in. I broke the kiss, stumbling back, my chest heaving. "We can't do this," I gasped, the words barely making it out. "This is wrong, Harold." He stood there, breathing just as heavily, his eyes dark with desire. "It doesn't feel wrong." I shook my head, running a hand through my hair, trying to get a grip. "It doesn't matter how it feels. You're with Allison." This I gestured between us, my voice shaking. "This can't happen again." Harold didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. Finally, he nodded, but there was something defiant in his eyes. "Fine, but I think you and I both know it's not over." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked away, my heart still racing, my mind screaming at me to stop this before it went too far. But deep down, I knew it already had. And there was no going back now. The days after the kiss were a blur of tension and guilt. I threw myself into work, spending more time at the bookstore than ever. Anything to avoid being at home with Harold. But even at work, I couldn't escape the constant churn of my thoughts. Jess called me a few times, asking how I was doing, but I didn't have the courage to tell her what had happened. I was afraid she'd say what I already knew, that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. At home, things got worse. I could feel Harold's eyes on me every time we were in the same room, and it made my skin prickle. Allison, oblivious to everything, went about her days with that bright smile she always wore when Harold was around. The guilt gnawed at me, but I still couldn't tell her. How could I? "How do you tell your sister you kissed her fiancé?" One evening, I was sitting at the dining table, pretending to focus on a book one wasn't actually reading, when Harold came into the room. I didn't look up, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone, but of course he didn't. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. I clenched the book tighter, refusing to meet his gaze. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm just busy." "Right," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look, Nate, I get it. You're freaked out, so am I, but we can't keep ignoring this." I finally looked up, anger flaring in my chest. "What do you want me to say, Harold? That this was all a mistake?" Because it was. His jaw clenched. "A mistake?" That's what you're calling it now. I closed the book, shoving it aside. Yes, Harold. It was a mistake. You're engaged to my sister. Do you not get how messed up this is? I get it, he said, leaning forward, his voice low and intense. But what I don't get is why you keep lying to yourself. We both know there's something between us, Nate. You can deny it all you want, but it doesn't make it any less real. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. It doesn't matter how real it feels, you're with her. You're supposed to be with her, not me. He stood up too, matching my height, his eyes locking onto mine. And what if I don't want to be with her anymore? That stopped me cold. My heart pounded in my chest, and the words hung in the air between us. I stared at him, struggling to breathe, to think. What are you saying? Harold took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that maybe I made a mistake too, with Allison. I shook my head, backing away. No, don't say that. Don't put this on me. I'm not putting this on you, he insisted, his voice calm but his eyes intense. I'm just telling you the truth. I care about Allison, but what I feel for you, it's different. I can't explain it, but it's there. And I think you feel it too. I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Allison walked in, her smile as bright as ever. Hey guys, she called out cheerfully, completely unaware of the storm brewing between Harold and me. I forced a smile, my heart racing. Hey, Allie. Harold stepped back, his face unreadable as he turned to greet her. Hey babe, how was work? She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, then glanced at me. You okay, Nate? You look pale. I'm fine, I lied, glancing down at the book one had abandoned. Just tired. Long day. Allison nodded, but I could see the concern flicker across her face. Well, take it easy, okay? We're all going out to dinner later. You coming? My chest tightened. The last thing I needed was to sit through dinner with Harold across from me, pretending everything was fine. I think I'll pass. Got some stuff to do. Allison frowned, but didn't push. All right, you're lost. We'll bring you back something. As she turned away, Harold caught my eye, and for a split second, everything between us came rushing back. The kiss, the tension, the unspoken feelings. And now, the revelation that he didn't want to be with Allison anymore. I forced myself to look away, grabbing the book and heading upstairs to my room, where I could finally be alone. But even there, Harold's words echoed in my mind, louder and louder until I couldn't think straight. He didn't want to be with her anymore. What the hell was I supposed to do with that? I buried my face in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. The guilt was unbearable, the temptation even worse. I wanted to do the right thing, but the lines between right and wrong were blurring faster than I could handle. And the worst part, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. The next few days were a delicate balancing act, dodging Harold's intense stares, pretending nothing was wrong around Allison, and trying not to completely lose my mind in the process. But the tension between Harold and me was electric, pulling us closer even when I fought against it. One night when Allison was out late at a work function, I came home to find Harold sitting on the couch, nursing a beer. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the soft hum of the TV in the background. The moment I walked in, I knew something was going to happen. There was this energy in the air, thick and suffocating. I want one, Harold asked, holding up his beer, his eyes never leaving mine. I hesitated, but then shrugged. Sure, what was one drink, right? I sat down on the opposite end of the couch, as far from him as I could get, but that did nothing to ease the tension. Harold handed me the beer, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment, and that small touch sent a shiver through me. I hated how much I wanted more. For a few minutes, we sat there in silence, both of us pretending to watch the TV. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, but all I could think about was him, sitting so close yet so far away. You gonna keep running from this? Harold's voice cut through the quiet, soft but firm, like he was tired of the game we'd been playing. I clenched my jaw, staring at the beer in my hands. What do you want me to say, Harold? That I want this. That I want you. I can't. You know I can't. He shifted on the couch, turning to face me. But you do. Don't you? My heart pounded in my chest. But I stayed silent, because there was no point in lying, not anymore. Nate, his voice was low, almost pleading. I can't stop thinking about you. About that night. I'm trying to do the right thing, but every time I'm around you, I don't know how to shut it off. I finally looked at him, the weight of his words hitting me hard. He wasn't just messing around. He wasn't playing games. This was real for him. And that terrified me. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice shaking. It'll destroy everything. Then let it, he shot back, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. What's the point of pretending? I'm not happy with Allison. I thought I was, but since us. I can't stop feeling this. I stood up, needing to get away, needing space to breathe, but Harold was on his feet too, grabbing my wrist before I could escape. The touch was soft but firm, and it froze me in place. Tell me you don't feel it, he whispered, stepping closer, his breath warm against my skin. Tell me to walk away, and I will, but if you don't. I swallowed hard. every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave, to shut this down before it was too late. But I couldn't. My heart was racing, my mind spinning, and all I could think about was how much I wanted him to kiss me again. I can't, I breathed, barely audible. That was all it took. Harold pulled me into him, his lips crashing against mine with the same intensity as before, and this time I didn't fight it. I kissed him back, harder, like I was trying to make up for all the times I'd pushed him away. His hands were on my waist, pulling me closer, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. It was just us tangled up in each other, like nothing else mattered. But deep down, I knew it did. I knew this was going to destroy everything. We pulled apart, both of us breathing heavily, the heat between us still burning. Harold rested his forehead against mine, his hand still gripping my waist. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. Harold's hands tightened around me. We figure it out. Together. I shook my head, stepping back, out of his grasp. "No, I need time. I can't just throw everything away. Allison, my family, all of it." Harold's face darkened, his frustration evident. "How much longer are you going to pretend, Nate? How much longer are you going to lie to yourself? To me?" I clenched my fists, torn between the guilt and the overwhelming desire crashing through me. "I just need to think," I said, turning away, heading for the stairs. "Please." As I walked up to my room, the weight of the situation finally hit me. There was no more avoiding it, no more hiding. I was in too deep now, and no matter what I chose, someone was going to get hurt. And I had no idea how to make the right decision. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, knowing things couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. But the longer I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, the more I realized I was trapped in a no-win situation. I was caught between what I wanted and what was right. And I didn't know how to make it stop spiraling out of control. I stayed out all day, avoiding the house, avoiding Harold, avoiding the whole damn situation. But by evening, I knew I couldn't hide forever. I had to face it, one way or another. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet, too quiet. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and that's when I heard voices. Allison and Harold talking in the kitchen. My heart rate spiked instantly. I moved quietly toward the sound, not sure why I was creeping, but I couldn't help myself. As I got closer, their words became clearer. "You've been distant," Allison's voice came, soft but laced with concern. "Is something wrong? You've barely looked at me for days." I froze just outside the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I shouldn't be listening to this, but my feet wouldn't move. I was stuck. And "I've just had a lot on my mind," Harold replied, his tone forced, like he was struggling to keep it together. "Harold, talk to me. We're getting married. If something's bothering you, I need to know." Allison's voice wavered, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. I leaned against the wall, my chest tightening. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. Harold was going to tell her. He was going to blow everything up. There was a long silence, and I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. "Allie," Harold started, but his voice trailed off. I could practically feel the tension radiating through the walls. I peeked around the corner, my stomach churning. Harold stood there, staring at Allison, his hands on the counter, his jaw clenched. He was struggling, caught between telling the truth and keeping the peace. My heart pounded in my chest because I knew I was the reason he was hesitating. But then he shook his head, letting out a long breath. "I'm just stressed. Work's been a nightmare, and I haven't been sleeping well. I'm sorry if I've been distant." I blinked, barely believing what I'd heard. He didn't tell her. He didn't say a word about us. Allison sighed, clearly relieved. "I get it. I've been stressed too with all the wedding planning. But we'll get through it, right?" Harold forced a smile. "Yeah, we will." I backed away from the doorway, my mind spinning. He'd had the chance to tell her. He could have ended it right then and there, but he didn't. He chose to lie. And as much as that should have given me relief, it only made things worse. I headed upstairs, the weight of what I'd just heard pressing down on me. Harold was lying to her. And so was I. We were both pretending this was something we could handle, something we could fix, but it was a ticking time bomb. And I knew it was only a matter of time before everything blew up in our faces. Later that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, there was a knock at my door. I didn't have to guess who it was. "Come in," I said quietly. Harold stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his expression grim. He crossed the room, sitting on the edge of my bed. We didn't say anything for a long moment. The silence between us was louder than words. "I couldn't do it," Harold finally said, his voice low. "I couldn't tell her." I sat up, my chest tight. "Why?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. "I don't know. Maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I don't want to hurt her. But I couldn't do it." I let out a shaky breath, not sure if I should be relieved or angry. "So what now? We just keep lying to her? Keep pretending everything's fine?" Harold looked at me, his eyes dark, conflicted. "I don't know what else to do, Nate. I don't know how to stop this." And neither did I. I was just as lost as he was, trapped in this twisted mess we'd created. I wanted to do the right thing, but every time I was around him, the lines blurred until I didn't even know what the right thing was anymore. "We need to figure it out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "before it's too late." Harold nodded, his hand brushing mine, sending that familiar spark through me. But this time, it didn't feel exciting. It felt like a reminder of just how far we'd fallen. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at me. "We'll figure it out," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I wasn't so sure anymore. I wasn't sure we could fix this without breaking everything. And the worst part, I didn't know if I even wanted to. The days after Harold's confession were an uneasy truce between us. He hadn't told Allison, and I was still wrestling with my own guilt. But there was something in the air, a tension that made every second around him unbearable. We both knew we were sitting on a ticking time bomb, but neither of us had the courage to cut the wire. Instead, we fell into this twisted routine of avoiding each other while stealing glances when no one else was looking. Then, one night, everything changed. I had just gotten home from work, expecting the usual Allison in the kitchen, Harold sitting on the couch, the three of us pretending like we weren't tangled up in this mess. But when I walked in, the house was dark, too quiet. Allison's car wasn't in the driveway. I found Harold in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His face was tense, his knuckles white as he gripped the glass. I could feel it, something was different tonight. "Where's Allison?" I asked, though my voice sounded hollow, like I already knew the answer. "She's staying with her friend tonight." "Wedding stuff," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I stood there for a second, the silence stretching between us, heavy and suffocating. I should have left. I should have walked right back out the door, but instead I stepped closer, drawn in by that pull we'd been fighting for so long. "Harold," I began, unsure of what I was even going to say. But he cut me off, his voice sharp. "I can't keep doing this, Nate." He finally looked up, his eyes dark and clouded with something I hadn't seen before. "I thought I could, but I can't." My heart pounded in my chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done pretending," he snapped, slamming the glass down on the counter. "I'm done lying to her, to you, to myself. Whatever this is between us, it's real, and I can't keep acting like it's not." I took a step back, my pulse racing. "Harold, stop. You don't know what you're saying. This is insane." "Is it?" he shot back, stepping toward me. "Is it really? Because the only thing that feels insane to me is trying to ignore what's right in front of me." I shook my head, trying to get a grip on the situation. "Allison is not the one I'm thinking about," he cut in, his voice quiet but full of raw emotion. "Not anymore. Every time I'm around you, it's like nothing else matters. And I've tried to fight it, but I can't. I don't want to fight it anymore." I stared at him, my whole body trembling with the weight of his words. The truth was out now, laid bare between us, and there was no taking it back. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying I don't want to keep lying," he said, stepping even closer, his eyes locked on mine. "I don't want to marry Allison when I'm in love with you." My breath caught in my throat, the room spinning around me. In love with me? This was too much, too fast. My mind screamed at me to run, to end this now before it spiraled any further, but my heart was betraying me, thudding in my chest like it wanted the very thing I was afraid of. "You don't mean that?" I managed to say, my voice shaking. "You're just confused. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." "I know exactly what I mean," he said, his voice softening but his intensity never wavering. "And I think you do too." I turned away, my head spinning, but Harold grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward him. His touch was gentle but firm, and it sent that familiar jolt through me, the one I'd been trying to ignore for so long. "Nate," he whispered, his voice so close, so desperate. "Just tell me you don't feel the same. Tell me you don't want this, and I'll walk away. I'll leave and you'll never have to see me again. But if you do." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. I knew what he was asking. He was giving me a way out, a chance to end this before it destroyed everything. But all I could think about was the kiss, the way he made me feel alive, the way my heart raced every time he was near. I closed my eyes, taking a shaky breath, knowing that once I answered, there would be no going back. "I can't," I whispered, my voice breaking. Harold pulled me closer, his lips brushing against mine in a way that was almost reverent, like he was savoring the moment before everything shattered. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. I didn't fight it. I kissed him back, slow and deliberate, letting everything I'd been holding back pour out of me. There was no hesitation this time, no guilt, just us tangled up in each other, the rest of the world fading into the background. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads resting together, I whispered the words that had been sitting heavy in my chest for so long, words I hadn't even admitted to myself. "I think I'm in love with you too." And just like that, the line between right and wrong disappeared completely. Harold's arms tightened around me, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe we could make this work, that maybe we could have this without everything falling apart. But deep down, I knew the truth. The real fallout hadn't even started yet. The morning after was suffocating. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting everything in this harsh, unforgiving light. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Harold's presence next to me impossible to ignore. His arm was draped across my chest, his breathing slow and steady. I should have felt something good, something comforting, but all I could feel was the weight of what we'd done. I shifted, careful not to wake him, slipping out of bed and pulling on my clothes in silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, looking at him, the man I'd crossed every line for. I could still feel his touch, his lips, the way everything felt so intense last night, but now, it was like waking up from a dream I knew I shouldn't have had. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. I left the room, my mind racing as I made my way downstairs. The house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable crash. I kept thinking about Allison. She'd be home soon. I had no idea what I'd say to her or what Harold would do. But whatever we had, it couldn't last. It wasn't real, not in the daylight. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, my hands trembling. What had I done? Just as I was trying to steady my breathing, I heard footsteps behind me. Harold was there, dressed, looking at me with this quiet intensity that only made everything worse. "You're leaving," he said softly. It wasn't a question. "I have to," I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. He stepped closer, but I backed away, the space between us suddenly too small. "Nate, don't run. We'll figure this out." I shook my head, my throat tight. "Figure what out, Harold? We're living in a lie. We can't keep doing this." He reached out, his hand brushing my arm, but I pulled away, the guilt pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice desperate. "We can talk to her. We can." "Talk to her," I snapped, finally letting the anger break through. "And say what?" "Hey, Allie, I'm in love with your fiancé, and by the way, we've been sleeping together behind your back. How do you think that's going to go?" Harold's face hardened, frustration clear in his eyes. "I don't know, but we can't keep pretending this didn't happen. I don't want to keep hiding." "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you got engaged to my sister." I yelled, the words spilling out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Harold's jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "I didn't plan for this, Nate. I didn't plan on falling for you. But I can't undo what's already happened." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I know you didn't, but it can't work. Not like this." He stared at me, his eyes searching mine for some kind of solution, something I couldn't give him. "So what are you saying?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. I swallowed, my chest tight. "I'm saying we need to stop. We need to end this before we destroy everything." Harold's face fell, and for a moment, I thought he might argue, but instead he just nodded, his shoulders slumping. "And what about us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked away, my heart aching. "There is no us, Harold. Not in this world." His silence was answer enough. He didn't push, didn't fight me. Maybe he knew deep down that I was right. There was no way this could go on without ruining everything. I couldn't hurt Allison any more than I already had, and I couldn't live with the guilt hanging over me. I turned toward the door, needing to get out before I changed my mind, but before I could reach the handle, Harold spoke again. "Nate," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I meant what I said. I'm in love with you." I froze, my hand hovering over the door. His words echoed in the quiet kitchen, and for a second, I almost let myself believe in the fantasy that maybe there was a world where we could be together without hurting anyone. But that wasn't reality. "I know," I whispered without turning back, "but that doesn't change anything." I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, and with it, the life I thought I could have with Harold. As I stepped outside, the weight of my decision settled over me. I'd made my choice, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I'd lost something I couldn't get back, but I had to keep going. I had to live with it, because at least now I could stop running from the truth. There was no going back. I just hoped I'd made the right call. And as I walked away from the house, from Harold, from everything we'd built, I knew one thing for certain: the fallout had only just begun.